The moment I knew everything was about to fall apart was when I pulled into the distribution center parking lot at 4 a.m. on a Wednesday and saw that every single loading dock was dark. No backup alarms from forklifts, no diesel engines idling, no workers in high-visibility vests hauling pallets under the fluorescent lights. Just silence and an empty yard where there should have been 200 refrigerated trucks getting loaded with produce bound for every major grocery chain in the Southeast. My name is Ray Callahan. I'm 53 years old, and for the past 14 years, I've been the director of fleet operations for Magnolia Fresh Distribution, the largest perishable goods logistics company between Atlanta and Miami. We move strawberries from Plant City, oranges from Lakeland, tomatoes from Immokalee, and about 400 other products from farms across Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, straight to the loading docks of Publix, Kroger, Walmart, and Costco. Every single day, 200 trucks roll out of our 3 warehouses, carrying $4.2 million worth of food that has a shelf life measured in hours, not days. But that morning, everything was wrong. When I walked inside, the office was already empty, the air thick with a strange sense of finality. The entire team had been sitting on edge for weeks, but now, it was like someone had just turned off the lights and I was left standing in the dark. We had a strict schedule to keep every minute counted. Our operations weren't just efficient, they were essential to keeping the shelves stocked in stores all over the region. I had just finished dealing with one of the biggest logistical messes in my career when the phone rang. It was a call that would change everything. A couple of hours later, I found myself in a meeting with the foreman, Brent. As usual, Brent was all about cost-cutting and managing the budget, not really paying attention to the real risks at hand. The vessel we were preparing to sink had been incorrectly moored, something I'd warned about countless times. I had raised my concerns with Brent, but he wasn't having any of it. "We'll just use the cheaper shackles," he insisted. But that was the moment I knew that this project was doomed. We were about to create a disaster. The ship was supposed to be part of an artificial reef, but it was more like a ticking time bomb, ready to tear apart everything in its path. Despite my warnings, Brent refused to make the necessary changes. When I pushed back and demanded the proper equipment, he fired me. The sheer arrogance in his dismissal was infuriating, but I knew one thing: this wasn't just about me. It was about the safety of the entire operation, and Brent was about to pay the price for his ignorance. I left the dock, my reputation in shambles, but I wasn't finished. I knew what would happen next. The ship would break free from its moorings, and chaos would follow. I wasn't about to let Brent get away with it. I had my logbook, and I had every detail documented. And so began the quiet vigil, the waiting game. The ship was already adrift, and it was only a matter of time before the disaster I'd predicted would unfold. Hours passed. I sat at my desk, staring at the marine traffic tracker on my laptop, waiting for the inevitable. My phone rang at 1 a.m. Call from the Port Authority. The striker had broken loose, drifting into one of the busiest shipping lanes in the area. The phone call was brief, but it felt like the world had shifted under my feet. Brent had told everyone the moorings were secure, but the evidence was now undeniable. The ship was heading straight for a massive container vessel, the MSC Isabella. The Coast Guard was scrambling, but they were still 20 minutes away. My heart raced as I watched the green dot on the map slowly drift closer to the path of the incoming container ship. Then the news alert came in: maritime emergency offshore, vessel adrift. That was it. The striker had collided with the Isabella. The damage was catastrophic. The ship had breached its hull, and now, the reef project was in ruins. It wasn't just a logistical failure, it was a $1 million disaster that could have been avoided if Brent had just listened. By the time the media picked up the story, they were already framing it as a careless mistake on my part. They called it the Dar Sea disaster, a term that stuck. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just a mistake. It was the culmination of a series of reckless decisions and outright fraud. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by the evidence, I knew exactly who was responsible. But the fight wasn't over. I had documented everything, and I had the proof. The next day, I reached out to a contact at the Port Authority, a woman named Maria, who owed me a favor. She got me the name of the deckhand who had witnessed the entire conversation between Brent and me, Trevor Mills. Trevor had seen the poor quality of the shackles, and he had heard the argument when I raised my concerns. Now, I needed to make sure he didn't fall victim to Brent's manipulation. I paid Trevor a visit. He was scared, cornered, but he knew what was at stake. I showed him my logbook, the damning evidence that Brent had ignored all safety concerns. Trevor knew the truth, but he was terrified of losing his job. It took some convincing, but finally, he agreed to tell the authorities what he had seen. The next step was to dig deeper. I knew there was more to this than just a few faulty shackles. I had heard Brent bragging about saving the company money on materials. It was time to trace the source of that savings. As the days went on, I pieced together the full scope of Brent's fraud. I had already uncovered the cheap, undersized shackles from Apex Industrial, but now I was following a digital trail. Brent had forged invoices, submitted fake paperwork for the high-grade materials, and pocketed the difference. His cuts weren't just small, they were massive. He had embezzled nearly $1 million by sourcing substandard materials for the reef project, the same project that was now sinking under the weight of his lies. I dug into the company's cloud procurement system, the one Brent was so proud of. It was supposed to be foolproof, but Brent's arrogance had made him sloppy. I hacked into his account, and what I found was even worse than I imagined. Every purchase order, every receipt, every invoice had been manipulated. Brent had been lying about everything from the concrete to the rebar to the very steel that was supposed to support the artificial reef. I gathered the evidence, but it wasn't enough to stop him, yet. The next move was crucial. I reached out to Captain Eva Rostova, the lead investigator, and handed her the data I had compiled. She was methodical, professional, and knew exactly what to do. The wheels were in motion, and it was only a matter of time before Brent was caught. The final showdown came when I was called to a meeting at Davies' construction headquarters. Mr. Davies, the company owner, was there, but he wasn't the man I had seen on TV. He looked defeated, broken by the mess Brent had made. Brent, on the other hand, was still trying to talk his way out of it, but the evidence was undeniable. The fraud, the lies, the stolen money, it all came out. Brent was arrested, and the company was left to pick up the pieces. But the real victory wasn't just in seeing him go down. It was in knowing that I had done what was right. I had fought for the truth, and in the end, that was what mattered. The last section of the fraudulent reef was pulled from the seabed, and as I looked out at the horizon, I realized that my battle wasn't just about salvaging wrecks, it was about salvaging integrity. The experience had taught me more than any 30 years at sea. It wasn't enough to be right. Sometimes, you had to fight to make sure the truth was heard. 3 months later, I found myself on the deck of the Resolution, a state-of-the-art salvage barge. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the calm water as the final piece of the fraudulent reef was hoisted from the seabed. Trevor Mills, who had come forward and testified truthfully, was now part of my crew. I made sure he had a job, a chance to rebuild his life after everything had fallen apart. The kid had integrity, and that was more valuable than any piece of paper or certification. As the crane lowered the final, crumbling concrete slab onto the barge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The reef project, once an idea meant to give back to the environment, had become a toxic monument to greed and deception. But now, it was being dismantled, piece by piece. The ecosystem, though damaged, could finally begin to heal. Allison stood beside me, her hand in mine. She had come out on the support boat to watch the last section of the saga come to a close. As the last slab was removed, she whispered, "It's over." I turned to her, squeezing her hand. "It's a new beginning." That was the lesson I had learned. The experience had taught me more than any 30 years at sea. I had been right, yes, but being right wasn't enough. I had to fight for the truth. I had to be the one to expose the lies, to stand up for what was right, even when the system seemed stacked against me. In that moment, I realized the wisdom I had gained. It wasn't just about salvaging wrecks. It was about salvaging integrity, and sometimes, the most important thing you can do is fight for what's right, no matter the cost. There were lessons in that. First, trust your gut. That cold knot in your stomach? That's an alarm bell. Don't ignore it. Second, documentation is your shield. My logbook was my salvation. In any professional dispute, the person with the most detailed, dated, and factual records has the upper hand. Always write it down, no matter how small it seems. And finally, actionable advice: don't assume someone else will handle it when you see something wrong. Speak up clearly and directly. Don't let a bully intimidate you into silence. And most importantly, understand that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to let it fail and be there with the tools and the proof to rebuild it correctly. Your integrity is the most valuable tool you'll ever own. So, if you're out there, facing something that feels too big to take on, remember this. The fight for truth might not be easy, but it's always worth it in the end. Message 5. You said, Tip took. Message 6. ChatGPT said, a few weeks after the salvage operation was complete, I sat in my office, the ocean stretching out before me. The Resolution had finished its work, and the fraudulent reef was no more. It felt like the end of a chapter, but it was also the beginning of something much larger. The company, once teetering on the edge of collapse, had started to rebuild. Davy's construction was undergoing an overhaul, starting with a renewed commitment to ethics and transparency. Mr. Davies, though shaken by the scandal, had proven to be a man of his word. He was doing everything he could to right the wrongs Brent had inflicted on his company. But for me, it wasn't just about moving on from this mess, it was about finding a new path forward. Mr. Davies had offered me a partnership, and with that offer came a new challenge. We were starting a new division of his company, Davies Marine Salvage and Environmental Remediation. It was a chance to use my skills in a way that would benefit not only the company, but also the environment. The reef disaster had been a wake-up call. There were too many corners being cut, too many risks taken for the sake of profit, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. The new division would focus on salvaging and restoring marine ecosystems, and it would serve as a reminder that the ocean, though unforgiving, was also our responsibility to protect. Every project would be handled with the utmost care, every decision made with integrity. As I stood there in my office, looking out at the vast horizon, I realized how far I had come. From the chaos of that fateful day on the striker to the peace of knowing that the truth had been uncovered and justice served, I had rebuilt my career, but more importantly, I had rebuilt my sense of purpose. Life on the ocean had always been about more than just salvaging wrecks. It was about protecting something much larger than ourselves. It was about ensuring that future generations could enjoy the same pristine waters, the same vibrant marine life that we had. And now, with my new role, I would have the opportunity to do just that. As for Brent, he had pled guilty to embezzlement, fraud, and reckless endangerment. His empire had crumbled, and he was serving a prison sentence for his actions. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that came at a high cost. The damage he had caused to the environment would take years to undo, and the lives he had affected would never fully heal. But as the crane lowered the last section of the reef into the water, I knew that, at least for now, the ocean had reclaimed a piece of itself. The fight wasn't over, but it was a fight worth continuing. And I was ready. Message sept. You said, Dipto. Message wit. ChatGPT said, months had passed since the operation, but the lessons from the disaster still resonated with me every day. Davy's construction, despite its past failures, had made strides to rebuild its integrity, and my new role with Davy's Marine Salvage and Environmental Remediation was starting to take shape. We had taken on several projects since that pivotal day, each one a reminder of the damage that cutting corners could do, not just to a company, but to the world itself. Every project now carried a different weight. It wasn't just about salvaging wrecks or cleaning up messes. It was about ensuring that the work we did contributed to something greater, a better, safer future for the environment. It wasn't an easy path, and there were moments when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. But each time I stood on the deck of a new ship, preparing it for its final journey, I felt the deep, quiet satisfaction of knowing I was doing the right thing. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were always just one mistake away from catastrophe. The lessons from Brent's failures had taught me that it wasn't just about having the right equipment, the right training, or even the right intentions. It was about maintaining those standards at every level, constantly ensuring that no shortcut was ever taken again. And that's the responsibility I carried with me every day. One morning, while inspecting a new ship for decommissioning, I noticed something I hadn't anticipated, an error in the calculations. If I hadn't caught it, the entire operation could have turned into another disaster. It was a small mistake, but it served as a reminder of just how fragile everything was. I took a moment to reflect, standing on the edge of the dock, watching the ripples in the water. The ocean had always been a reminder of the unstoppable forces of nature, but it was also a reminder of our responsibility to respect and understand those forces. And in that moment, I realized that the work I was doing wasn't just about fixing the past. It was about making sure that future generations wouldn't have to face the same mistakes. I had made my peace with the past, but the future was still ahead of me. As I watched the cranes move the wrecks into place for the next salvage operation, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't finished. There was still work to be done, and as long as I was around, I would make sure it was done the right way. The ocean might be a vast, unpredictable force, but so long as there were people like me standing on its shores, ready to protect it, there was hope. The resolution had brought us here, but it was only the beginning.